Movies with sound have come a long way from silent films to optical toys that have repeated movement nonstop. But the process of which it took to get there is truly inspiring. It all started in the 18th century with optical toys. During this time, scientists were fascinated by studying the brain and how it processed information by using optical illusions. Because of this, people experimented with ways to further the interest of optical illusions. One of the ways they did this was through optical toys, which were cylinder-like contraptions that the user would spin around and look into and see tiny little pictures that seemed to create illusion of movement at the speed of which the cylinder spun. This was the first attempt at something that many people know as film. Originally, optical toys were handheld devices that the viewer would hold in front of a mirror and look through the slots to see the movement. A few years later, they were able to make it so that people could see the pictures moving at the same time. Then came silent films. From 1894 to 1929, silent films thrived. Silent films were mainly created by taking multiple pictures in a few seconds and stringing them together to create what is called a video nowadays. The pictures would be put on a film strip and then placed in a wheel, which would then be projected onto a big screen. Silent films had no synchronized sound, especially in dialogue, which is what they are best known for. Editors would use title cards to implement the dialogue and narration that the audience would miss by not having sound.
Lee DeForest was an American inventor and was born on August 26, 1873, in Council Bluffs, Iowa. His father was a Congregational church minister and the president of Talladega College, which was an all-black school located in Alabama. Lee DeForest's father wanted Lee to follow in his footsteps, but to no avail. DeForest wanted to carve his own path and become something great. DeForest went on in physics and got his Ph.D. from Yale in 1896. He had been interested in invention since he was young and even began creating his own inventions in high school in attempts to sell them for money. Even though most of them were not successful, by the time DeForest died, he had earned over 300 patents. One of Lee's most popular inventions was the audion tube. The audion tube was a small device that was capable of creating and receiving a more sensitive reception of wireless signals than the other devices that were used at that time. This meant that it took the weak signals and amplified them so that they were better understood and heard throughout the system. DeForest invented the device by inserting a grid into the center of the vacuum tube. By applying voltage to the end of the grid, DeForest was able to control the amount of a second current flowing across the tube. AT&T took notice, and in 1913 they installed audions to boost voice signals as they traveled throughout the U.S. continent. Not much later, the audion tube was used in radios, and DeForest was labeled one of the fathers of the electronic age, since the audion helped start the explosion of electronics. Even though the audion tube was highly successful, DeForest wanted more. He wanted to be a household name that everyone knew and admired. It took him few years to find a project that he hoped would do just that. But even though he didn't get much fame as he had hoped, DeForest made a lasting impact on the entire world for years to come.
With Lee DeForest trying desperately to become famous, he took his knowledge about sound and converted it into a way to create something life-changing. He was able to synchronize sound with film by inventing what he proudly called the phonofilm. The phonofilm allowed them to record voices by picking up the sound waves and etching words onto a wax disc with a needle that is moved by the sound waves. The only problem with his device was the fact that when he tried to combine the film with the sound, the two did not sync up, and the video would be at a different speed and time than the sound would. Lee figured that if he hooked up the phonofilm to a light bulb to try to put sound onto the same film strip as the picture, it might work. The light bulb was used to detect the voice and would burn sound waves onto the film itself. The louder the noise, the lighter the bulb would brighten, and the quieter the noise, the dimmer the light bulb would turn. With this new updated version of his phonofilm, it was perfectly synced up to his video. The new problem, though, was that the words of the video were unidentifiable. He realized that his problem was that the light did not etch specific enough to determine and copy the words put on the film. Lee reluctantly realized that he needed help. He didn't know how to go any further with his new device, and he could tell that he was close to a breakthrough, but was almost out of money. He ended up recruiting Theodore Case, a former Navy engineer. Case had worked independently for years on sensitive signaling technology. DeForest knew that he needed Case for his knowledge, even though he wasn't too keen on sharing the credit and fame. Case knew that if he helped DeForest, then he would gain the fame he needed to start his career. With Case and DeForest now both working on the phonofilm, sparks flew as they collaborated and came up with ideas on how to fix the device. Case decided to put a more reactive and highly sensitive light bulb that would pick up more sound and be much crisper. Later, after many months, they decided to test the invention. When the film started to play, the sound was perfectly synced up with the video and the words were eligible to hear. This is when they broke through the barrier of silent movies and invented the very first short talking picture. April 15, 1923, DeForest and Case shared their optical sound revelation at a theater.
Even though DeForest had worked so hard on the phonofilm, he couldn't get filmmakers to agree to use his new device. And when Warner Brothers did make one, it was using Vitaphone, which was newer and a better device. The Vitaphone was invented by Bell Telephone Laboratories in the 1920s. This system was not first fully welcomed when the Warner Brothers used it to create the Jazz Singer. The Jazz Singer was also mainly a musical. It had lots of singing and very minimal talking. The Jazz Singer was the first feature film to have sound synced up to their video completely. The Jazz Singer was directed by Alan Crosland and starred Al Jolson as the main lead in the movie. The Jazz Singer was released in 1927, which is supposedly the end of the silent film era. The phrase, "You ain't heard nothing yet," found in the movie The Jazz Singer, was a foreshadowing of how movies would take a turn for the better and how sound film industry was just getting started.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you.
Even though The Jazz Singer was not the first full talkie, it is still seen as the first full-length movie that included sound. Because of the concept of sound in movies was new at the time and extremely naive, the first full-length all-talking motion picture was The Lights of New York, and it wasn't created until 1928. Either way, The Jazz Singer carved a path that has changed the lives of many people.
Since the talkies were first invented, the film industry has made leaps and bounds and thoroughly allowed their products to evolve and improve. The Vitaphone was even eventually replaced by the sound-on-film process that DeForest invented using the phonofilm. And since silent films, movies have developed better sound quality and much better picture quality in terms of being able to include color and having many more pixels on the screen, making it have a much more realistic look. Entertainment methods are now able to submerge the viewer into the movie and make them feel as if they are a part of it. The comparison between silent films and movies with sound was incredible. This is because the audience would be missing a complete sense of their own surroundings and be fully invested on what was happening on the screen with sound. When the movie sound barrier was broken, society took a huge step forward. This led to things such as better connection with the audience and enabled them to feel as if they were a part of the movie.
Don't worry, Marv, I'll get him for you.
Yes. Wanna go tree climbing, Thomas J? His face hurts. And where is his glasses? He can't see without his glasses. Put his glasses on. Put on his glasses. He was going to be an acrobat.
Imagine today's movies without sound. Even though closed captions is now invented, the audience does not feel the drama or impact that they do when they are able to listen to the movies with sound compared to without. They don't tense up before a huge battle at the end of a movie without the dramatic music, or when a very important character dies and they hear them coughing up blood and saying their last few words weakly. The view of the movie could be scary, but not as much without the impending music and the screams of the characters when something happens. Movies would be entirely different without sound, and so would our lives.